Welcome to the UsageMoments podcast. Like always, brought to you by Digital Root, a leading usage and outcome monetization platform. I'm Ari, CMO, and your podcast host. In this podcast, we talk to leaders, thinkers, and doers about modern digital monetization trends, strategies, and pragmatic issues. Today, we are diving into one of the most disruptive and frankly underestimated shift beyond the first generation SaaS pricing. For years, SaaS pricing remained very safe, very stable, and predictable until it was not. The scalable growth model that everyone loved once started cracking. Today, monetization strategies are rapidly evolving and changing. Pricing is no longer a spreadsheet exercise at the end of the product design. It's becoming a strategic weapon, and for many companies, also a headache. And today's guest is helping us to navigate through the perfect storm. He's a senior advisor and CEO of Willingness to Pay. I'm really excited about this conversation, not because it's only strategic, but because it's also deeply, deeply practical. Let's jump in. This is my usage moment with Ulrik Lehrskov-Schmidt. All right. Welcome, Ulrik, to Usage Moment podcast. I'm so glad to have you. I have millions of questions to you, but why don't we start with the introduction? Tell us who you are, what do you do, and especially what is keeping you busy right now, and what's the impact your company is making, or you and your company are making for your clients.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So, my name is Ulrik, and I'm a pricing expert. And how I got to be a pricing expert is that's sort of that's a little bit like an unknown path. But I started almost accidentally. I've been an operator in the past, and then I happened to write a book on pricing psychology, and people started to ask me about pricing, and then I just tried to help. And then a decade later, I've done 200 commercial transformations on pricing, and that's what I built the firm around. So we work only with complex technology companies, and we only do pricing and packaging, and we do it globally. So yeah, it's one of these things it sounds boring, but it's endlessly interesting. So at least to me.
And of course, seeing what's going on right now in the world, I can imagine you are very busy at the moment, and there's a lot of demand for your kind of a service and advice. And I'm glad to see pricing becoming back as a strategic weapon in a way. Because it's you read all the marketing textbooks, pricing has always been the differentiator, the source of innovation, but suddenly over the past decade, I would say, the first generation SaaS pricing became quite boring, to be honest. Everyone looked the same. So tell me, what are you seeing right now happening? Do you, in your books, is this more like a evolutionary next stage, what is going on, or is this more like a disruptive moment, like we move from licenses to subscription? Is this something similar to you, or is this more natural evolution in your books?
I think it's a natural evolution, and sometimes time moves quickly and changes fast, and sometimes it moves a little bit more slowly. So I think it's always been this combination of what you sell and how you sell it. So the products evolve, but also the business models evolve, right? And I think if you go back, you had software, and then that was a new product, and then people invented ways to sell that. Initially, there was sort of on-prem perpetual licenses. Suddenly, the internet came, and now you could actually deploy software and update it from a distance. And then we had subscription, but we didn't have usage data. We didn't have sort of close connections to the installations. So we had to have, let's say, relatively simple license setups. But now with technology, we have much more sort of closely relatable sort of data structures that are more real time, and we have many more measuring points. So that gives more opportunities for business models. And I think that's what we're seeing. And then paired with the fact that AI costs money as opposed to, let's say, traditional SaaS that had, let's say, very high margins, we now see also this, let's say, situation where on one hand, we need the innovation because AI costs money, so we can't keep doing what we used to do. And on the other hand, innovation is possible because we have the data access, so we actually can price in different ways. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, we see a lot of, and that's what I like, because it's more the innovation that what is our pricing model, how do we monetize is more diversified right now. It's coming as a strategic element, a lever for the growth. But you mentioned usage, and there's a lot of talks now about a usage-based monetization strategies, outcome-based, performance-based, results, hybrids. So what are you, when you're talking to your clients, what are you seeing? What is the biggest trend, or how do you, are we seeing all of them coming up right now?
I think the biggest trend is how to deal with this kind of question when you have as much uncertainty as you have right now. So I think the biggest, let's say, issue from a monetization perspective with AI is that whatever AI is, it is moving, which means that 12 months from now, it's going to be something else. The models are going to cost something else, and they're going to be able to do something else, which means that the rate of change that was acceptable 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, we say, hey, we're going to create a new pricing model, and we're going to ride that for 4 or 5 years, and then we'll review whatever. Suddenly is so obviously not working, because if we create something now with the intent of having it for the next 2, 3, 4 years, we are making like an objective strategic failure. So suddenly it becomes a meta question where people are like, okay, so not only do we need to create a new pricing model that sort of handles all the particulars of where we are, we also need to set up something that allows us to change it really fast. And then you hit business reality with, oh, we have multi-year contracts, we have a lot of technical debt, like we have a lot of things that are not allowing us to be as agile and quick as we would like to be on this sort of strategic perspective, right? And I think that's really what's often, it depends a little bit on which customer I'm talking to, but sometimes the conversation starts there, and sometimes it starts at the particular level. We don't know how to do this, but then that sort of amorphous strategic sort of change level sort of creeps in and becomes something that needs to be answered as well.
What I'm getting from you now, right now, is that regardless what is the future monetization model or pricing model, you need to stay dynamic, because there's no one truth. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, because the first generation SaaS was because it was so successful and Wall Street loved that model and it was so scalable. So everyone copied the same model, and that was kind of a more unified model. But now what you're seeing is more, there are more moving parts, right?
Yeah, and what you're seeing is that actually you have this almost like inverse relationship where it's actually the larger players that are moving the fastest. So someone like OpenAI or someone like Salesforce are changing their pricing models like 10 to 15 times a year, which means that they're throwing out new products with new models, willing to change those pricing models like months later if they don't sort of like have adoption in the market. So I think a lot of these larger players are realizing that they can't have a model that just like they assume is going to work for the next like 5 years in the market. So they're taking it in as a strategic capability to sort of weaponize the ability to say, hey, we have the capital to throw 10 different pricing models with the same product into the market, see which one works, and then that's what we bet on, right? And that ability to sort of test, iterate, and sort of move faster than competition is what is going to sort of, I think, be sort of long-term viable, as opposed to, meditating for a long time and finding the perfect model and then like betting all in on that.
You mentioned AI. Obviously, that has been, when we are talking day in and day out, helping customers to make it happen, really. After they get an advice from you guys like you, and then they come to us and say, hey, let's make this happen. AI is like you mentioned, it comes with the cost right now. And if I like to compare again to when we moved from licenses to subscription model, there was time to adapt to that one. There was I read an article about Adobe's transformation from software licenses to SaaS, and it took 4 years. And now you don't have that time because the course is right away there. So you don't have that time to. So how do you see that urgency? And because that's what I'm seeing, that it needs to happen now and fast. And that's why some of the companies are a little bit,
Yeah. So we see more sort of higher executive level involvement in some of the projects we have, where before it was maybe sort of delegated a little bit down in the organization. So now it's more sort of a strategic involvement. And then the second thing we see is that our clients want projects to be executed faster. So on one way it would be normally it would be, we're going to spend 3 or 4 months to come up with the right model and validate it. And then we will spend a couple of months, let's say, technically preparing for it. And then 6 months after we start, we can launch the new model, and then we would test and so forth. And that seems to be compressed, where people were like, we would like to launch something in 2 months. We would like to launch something in 3 months. And we are willing to, cut the Gordic knot, organizationally, technically, in order to get there at that speed. And I think that's excellent. Would have also been excellent 5 or 10 years ago, but now it's sort of it's also necessary. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I promised to the audience that we will be pragmatic today. So, what are the typical execution related questions that you are hearing from the customers? Okay, what does it require? And what do you see are the most important things or priorities to get going with the new, when you're transforming from certain model to a next one, which is usage or outcome based, or the execution level questions?
So you have sort of two buckets of questions. You have internal and external concerns. So external concerns is, oh, customers are not going to like this. Our channel partners are not going to like this, whatever. So it's we can do it, but the market will not accept it, right? So you need to then sort of figure out, and you need to sort of know how to ask the right questions to sort of design something that the market will accept. And often it's with these kinds of things oh, our customers would never accept usage-based pricing because they need pricing to be predictable. And then you need to accept that, but then say, okay, so what does that mean exactly? Can we break that down? And maybe it's fine if it's not as predictable, as long as they're able to measure and control it over time, or they can actually sort of measure it in real time, and they can create, let's say, caps or roles and permissions, so who can actually approve more usage, what are the limits, and how does it actually sort of work. So sometimes you can actually sort of take an external concern like that and say, we can solve for that in the way we structure the model so that it becomes feasible anyways. And internally, you have things like the ability to create the right billing, to create feature entitlement, like license entitlement, all these kinds of things. These are usually issues, but not insurmountable issues. I would say something that is often a larger point of friction, but more of a cultural issue, has to do with sales culture, where we used to have a model where we're dealing with that right now with the client, where they have a sales culture where they're used to have a sales team that books revenue on committed volumes. And for whatever reason, that doesn't really sort of sit well with the way their product is actually used. So we are shifting that now to a more usage-based model where customers get access to the product and they're billed in arrears depending on how it works. But that is a big shift culturally for the sales team, who are used to hit quota and be sort of commissioned on on these sort of committed volumes. So we have an incentive problem in sales culture that needs to be shifted. And obviously with that, we also need to sell it to sales. We need to convince them that this new model is going to be better at monetizing and creating adoption and overall sort of creating a better commercial future than the commit version that they're using today, right? So we need to recruit sales as an ally instead of at a certain point in these types of processes, they can be a friction point. And so I think on the list of internal concerns, that's often something you see there.
Right. What about, how do you see the role of data? I mean, real-time data, because obviously this means that if you are usage-based, outcome-based, it's all running on data and real-time data. Mm-hmm. Do you see that in a similar manner?
So I think the first thing I would say is that when we send a data request to customers, we ask them to think first and data second, right? So say, okay, so you probably have a ton of data and some of it is likely very useful to us, but maybe not all of it. So maybe think through what actually has connection to value, how it actually connects to behavior with customers and so forth. And let's sort data in that way. And then you also need to be able to see, like look at your data and see what data you haven't got. So does there exist data, let's say revenue data for your clients that's not inside your system, but it's very relevant as a monetization information, right? So just the ability to recognize that that data exists is just not something you have. It's important when you move forward. But then, so that can actually sort of direct you to what data you should be looking for. And maybe sometimes you need to create what we call synthetic data, which is like estimated or structured or constructed data based on other data sources. So let's say if we have, let's say, a number of assets, we might be able to derive number of contracts in some scenario, something like that. Once we're there and we have some data points and you want to monetize based off of some data points, you need to be able to communicate and align with the customer on what the data point means. So you should say, hey, we're pricing you based on an API call. And the customer might say, well, are they only API calls between you? Also like internally in your system, which we don't have any control, like which API calls are we counting? Are we counting all of them? If so, why? In what way? Do I have an audit function on this? Can I measure it? Like what's the time period? Like, and so on, right? So the alignment functionality and the measurability functionality, especially in real time, is going to create a lot of trust. So if you say, we're going to price you based on API call, but it's going to happen inside of the black box, we're not going to openly define what an API call is. And we can't show you how we arrive at the number. And when we arrive at the number, we're going to do so like 3 months in arrears. So we're going to hit you with a usage number that you have zero control over, and you have a long lag time period as well. So even if customers were theoretically fine with the API call pricing, they're not fine with the execution of it because of the measurability. So you basically need to say, okay, we have a very clear technical definition, we have measurability, we have auditability, we have it real time, we have all these things, right? The second step is actually to then create predictability. So instead of looking backwards in time, you now look forward to say, okay, so based on what you have going on, we think that you're going to use these many API calls in the next period. And because of what you build, you're like on track to be within your like invoice quota, whatever. So you have that. And then the last step is control. So you have measurability, predictability, and control. And control is basically allowing to say, hey, we'll notify you when this happens, and you can set caps and you can say, hey, Sarah can approve more API calls, but Mike can't, whatever it is. So these kinds of things can be hugely important as well to get customers to adopt.
All what you are saying right now, it sounds like, because in the first generation seat-based flat fee monthly subscription, that was never needed, because in the end of the day, all you need to know is by the end of a month, you know who are the active users, and then you send a bill, and all of that is now coming to. So do you feel that people realize how big is the shift in capabilities that you need? Because it is a big to me.
For sure. And I think what's also going on, and you see this partially in the way that credit-based pricing is used right now, is that if you think about it, the old license model was you sold people a right to use. Like you have a right for 10 seats, whatever. You actually see different versions on, let's say, API call. Something is also a right to use. Like I sell you 10 billion API calls. And if you only used 5 billion, you're lost. Like you paid for 10 billion, that's what you have used to purchase a right, which means that the vendor, you get the cash up front and the customer carries the full risk. Like that's how a license is set up. Usage-based reverses those three things. I give access to use, and now if they don't use, I don't get paid, right? So what happens is that now I, as the vendor, carry the usage risk. Like I have no idea if I'm going to get paid or not, and the cash comes at the end of the period. This also usually means that whenever you have the contract length amplifies this. So you have a 3-year contract. Licenses are great. Like if you can get 3 years paid up front, you get 3 years of cash loaded. Usage-based, I don't think I've seen a 3-year contract where you pay for usage after the 3 years have passed. But in theory, it was sort of like an annual, it amplifies this modality. So license is a modality and usage is modality. What credit systems do is actually that they take components of both things. So they say it's usage-based, paid up front. So you're going to give me the money now, and then you have some usage, and then what you don't use, we're going to roll it over because we only want you to pay for what you use. But it shifts the cash flow and the risk in opposite directions, which I think is sort of compared with the ability to actually execute it technically, because also it seems as a compromise from like a risk perspective between vendor and buyer on some of these things. So I think a lot of sales teams are stuck sort of in the risk profile from license-based pricing. And then, of course, the customers are sort of pushing, actually not unilaterally, but a lot of customers are pushing to usage-based, but they kind of want usage-based, but with a cap. They want to pay for only what they need, but they don't want to go about budget. Like they want to get value, but know what it is like ahead of time. And that the last problem is something that you actually need to solve with customers with this sort of measurability, predictability, control trifecta that you sort of can put in place. But it's one of these things where there is just like some business reality on risk and control that just needs to be dealt with, and somebody needs to pick up that check.
I wanted to ask Ulrik one question regarding when you're talking to the management teams. I mean, and there are the famous CXOs, the titles. Who is the one that is typically hesitant to move on with the new monetization model? Is it because we know from a CFO point of view, for example, that every change in pricing is a nightmare, kind of because you're set up for the certain systems, the processes, the whole quote to cash is built for something, and then comes, oh, we need to rebuild it. We need to, and that's we know that it's in reality that is so who are the ones that are typically saying no? Can we pause this? Not now, maybe later, type of thing. If you take the CFO, CRO, CMO, legal.
So I would say that the person most often saying no is actually also a person very often saying yes, which is actually the CRO. So often it's like finance like understands the necessity if there is a need. So that's fine. Product, likewise. CEO, likewise. So all these roles are like they can be promoters. They have concerns that need to be addressed, and you need to sort of like work, like integrate that into a model. A CRO sometimes can have the idea that they feel that this is a problem they should be able to solve. So they say like, don't worry, guys, I got this. We'll just work harder, or we'll whatever the necessary thing might be. So they want to sort of own the problem, and instead of, let's say, accepting that this is a company-wide issue that needs to be addressed with, let's say, cross-functional alignment. And of course, that can mean that they have to give up in an intermediate period when you design the new thing, a little bit of agency. Like they don't have full control of how this is going to go, because suddenly it turns into like a conversation, especially with product, and then after that you need to go to maybe the development guys and the CFO office to figure out how you actually execute this, and customer success needs to be at the back end of it, so they have concerns, and all of this to some CROs can feel slow. Like this, like, oh, this is not something like I want to solve this in 2 or 3 weeks. Like we will like not in 2 or 3 months. So there can be this tendency to want to move so fast that they so you like the saying is like, if you want to go fast, go alone, and so forth. And some CROs can be like that, where it's like, hey, before we go together, let me just try and see if I can get this done myself. So usually we do sort of, if that's the situation, we do like a catch and release. Like from us, it's like, okay, like try, go ahead. Like if it works, great. Like you didn't need us in the first place. And if it doesn't, now we're aligned. Like now everybody knows what the real problem is. And so I think the issue sometimes can be that a good CRO can be in a position where they can move numbers somewhat, like say, hey, we can move the needle 10% or 15% or whatever it is. And sometimes you have situations where shifting the entire model would be like a 1, 2, 3, 400% increase because the business model is so obviously better somewhere else, right? And then so it's more, you can have errors of omission more with these kinds of projects where you execute something that everybody thinks is great. Like remember when we did the price increase, we did like 10, 20% lift, and we changed a few parts of the discounting structure. And then that can be fine too. And sometimes we get clients where they raise prices 20%, nothing happened. They did it again, nothing happened. And then the third time they come to us and say, hey, we want to know where we're at because we keep raising the prices and the market does not push back. So let us know where the ceiling is on this one.
Right. Yeah, the reason why I was asking is that the way we see that is it's the holy trinity of the finance teams, the CRO teams, product and pricing guys, and then there's typically also the engineering, the IT teams that are actually making it happen on a system level and on data level and all of that. So it requires more than just one. But are you recommending typically for the clients to take experimenting it with the new products in some part of the business, or is it like a full blown? What is your advice to try the new models?
Depends on the situation they're in, right? So sometimes you have like urgency created by the market or disruption or something, and then you need to be a little bit more heavy-handed. So what we often suggest is that you validate before you execute. So you can actually talk to customers about what they would want to buy before you actually have to build the entire like setup to take it to market. So that can be like, it's very, very easy to create a PowerPoint and talk to a customer. That can be done in days, not months. And then that can give you more insight than you think. And then for companies that have these sort of larger transformation projects ahead, it's actually a very quick way to sort of innovate, which is like, we sit down, we come up with some hypotheses that we talk to customers, then we go back and refine, and then we can actually have 4, 5, 6 cycles of these conversations in a couple of months. That helps us really refine our thinking about the direction where they want to go in. And then we can start to build the infrastructure to get there, right? And I think that can sometimes be a much better way than trying to sort of keep your cards very close and then try to sort of make a big move in the market following this sort of big execution hurdle, right? So then this actually also tends to create a lot of alignment inside the organization if you can go and say, hey, finance, rev ops, sales, product, we have had these series of conversations with customers. We have come up with this overall design structure that works in this way. And we're very particular with this is the pricing model, this is the discounting, this is how we're going to measure everything. And customers like it. This is the structured feedback we have, and it's very positive. So we think it's going to work. And when you show something like that, then that actually creates this like come together moment in the organization. We're like, okay, now let's get together and build it. And then everybody understands that they have to sort of participate and lift their part.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So, in your opinion, I'm interested in hearing from you that if we consider this now, and when we consider this now as a big transformation, like licenses to subscription, the first generation, and now we are moving to the usage outcome, performance based or hybrid, which is in compounding the complexity. We all know that. But who, in your opinion, will be the next winners? We know that I just read an article about that, or it was actually a research showing that it was specific industry, though don't generalize it, but they say that the ones that are going now with the outcome and usage based, they grow 20 to 30% faster than the ones that are stuck with the seat based and flat fees. And there are millions of reasons for that, because it's harder and harder to scale the number of users that used to be the, I mean, we know flat fees are flattening, seats are dropping, margins are under pressure. We all know the problem. But who are the winners? I mean, right now, in your opinion, what kind of a companies, and are you impressed about some of those? I mean, you don't need to mention names, but who are the winners in this new?
I think the winners are the ones that understand that pricing is almost or as important as product. So it's not. I think you can definitely have a license model. You don't necessarily need to charge per seat. You can charge per something else. So I think the winners are the ones that are able to, in a very, very clear way, articulate the value of their product and align the pricing model with that. So instead of having a license per user, I might have a license per retail location or a license per something else, which is still technically the same kind of model. I'm just measuring a different unit, right? And then if that unit makes more sense for the product that I put into the market, then that's probably a better model than the user-based or the seat-based model. And I think just realizing that and then figuring out how that goes is probably those are the ones that will win, and that can take a little bit of time. And then you'll see that in vertical software, and you'll see that in horizontal applications, also different roles. I think so. So I think it's if you're sleeping on it and using a pricing model that isn't aligned with what you deliver to the market, you are going to be left behind. I want to say another thing is that I think it's true that usage-based models are probably growing faster than traditional sort of seat-based or license-based models. I think there's a big survivorship bias in that, meaning that we're not measuring all the ones that died, which means that we're not measuring all the companies that tried it, failed, and went out of business. So it's one of these where the distribution of results is more extreme, where you can have big successes and you can have big failures. And by the nature of capitalism, the failures sort of they fall out of the data set because we're not measuring. So we're only measuring the companies that are still around. And since the failures failed, we're over-indexing on the successes, right? So it's a little bit on good freemium models. You have the same issue with all the ones that had poor freemium models, they went out of business. And then you have a few huge winners like Gmail and others hey, look at how freemium works. And it's right that freemium can be a tremendous go-to-market sort of approach, but that doesn't mean that it's right for you. It could totally destroy your business, right?
Right.
And so it's one of these things where you want to know that it's a powerful tool, and then you want to apply it with some deliberate care to your particular circumstances, right? Because it might also kill you, right? And so that's really what we see here is that I think it's the one that uses the deliberation in order to apply the right model that will win, rather than the ones that go hybrid or full usage and so forth.
Right. Yeah. And it was interesting. I was participating one group discussion with the CFOs, large companies, and there was, I mean, for them the new reality is obviously very pragmatic. That they say that they are used to 80 to 90% margins in software, and now suddenly they are anticipating that dropping 20% because of the cost of computing power and AI cost and all of those LLMs. So, and for any company dropping margins like 20%, it's a nightmare. So they need to react on that one. That was one. And then they say that, and now when there was one company moving from traditional SaaS model to the usage-based, and then suddenly he said that the customers never called us and asked about the invoice, because it was so every month you get an invoice and it's clear. And now suddenly people are calling the call center and asking, hey, explain this invoice to me. Explain the details of it and how come this is true. And what you just said a few minutes ago about the customer experience, and suddenly the customer center is calling finance and asking questions that, hey, we need to explain this invoice. And that's totally new for the finance teams in general. So there are these unexpected questions and complexities that are coming with this one. So that's what we are seeing, that people are a little bit underestimating the complexities that come with that one. So
I think so. I think there is a topic that needs to be addressed, partly because margins are being compressed, but also because of the new sort of rate of change in pricing models, and also because of the way that we're moving sort of a little bit from, let's say, a sales-led license-based motion to sort of experimenting with other models like hybrid and usage and so forth. And that is the concept of commercial debt. So commercial debt is a term that I use to describe the variance across different but similar customer relationships. So the idea is, if you have 100 enterprise customers and they're all on different contracts, they're all on slight different variations of how the product is set up, how the pricing is scoped, how the license terms works, what the billing periods are, cancellation terms, whatever. All of these things. What will happen is that your billing system now needs to be, let's say, set up to handle all these exceptions. Your standard operating procedures are not standard at all. You essentially have one SOP for every client. So customer success will need to be sort of deeply knowledgeable about individual account-based, let's say, agreements in order to even serve them. And any renewal motion is also sort of almost like spending the CAC, the customer acquisition cost, all over again, because it's like a start from scratch negotiation, right? So if you build your company like that, where you say, hey, we're allowing our sales teams to have a lot of like elbow room to create deals and like structure good agreement and win the business and close the quarter and all these things, what happens is that this commercial debt, just like technical debt, builds up over time and creates this operational load that you just need to deal with. So my primary example is Salesforce, that spends, I think, $13 billion a year on sales and marketing costs and only adds like $2 billion of revenue. So it's like, why with someone like that, which is like obviously like almost like a primary or a pinnacle example of like the traditional like successful SaaS model. Like we sold all these user-based seats and like the massive success, and they defined a category and all this. Why are they not more profitable? And I think the answer is because they went first. So they had to make all the mistakes that ends up creating this huge commercial debt, where I think if you come after now and you look at that kind of success, you have to ask yourself, do we want to emulate that? And if the answer is no, then you probably have to create a commercial model that allow you to be more scalable in the way you create customer relationships. And that produces this sort of next level question, which is, how do we then do that if we at the same time have to experiment with pricing models? So you have to create the structure where you get to experiment with new models. You have to execute them in an extremely disciplined way. And you have to create this expectation alignment and management with clients, where you get to move them to new models in order to collapse cohorts, so you don't grandfather like endless sort of types of customers and deals and structures along the way. Because that is the only way in which you as a vendor can keep margins relatively sound, which means that you can keep your keep the money that customers pay you to go into new innovation and new product rather than just into operational overhead. And I think that fundamental negotiation is happening on a market level between sort of buyers and vendors at a whole, because individual buyers want to have a deal, but vendors have to stand firm and say there cannot be a deal, because if we offer everyone a deal, then our margins are gone and we can't grow, and we quickly will sort of default to essentially spending all of our revenue on just internal costs. Mm-hmm. And then that does not create a success. So you have to sort of say, hey, this is going to be a short-term pain where we stand firm on the pricing in order to create that scalable business on the long term that actually generates new product value. And I think that is a problem that we tackle a lot, and also let's say use it almost as an extra win when we create new pricing, is that we are able to clean up all this commercial debt, all these legacy contracts, all these sort of bespoke agreements and those sort of different sort of product configurations. Hey, let's create a new model that does what we think is sort of the best for the market. And in so doing, we also, clean up all this sort of legacy so that we end up with a more scalable business where sales can actually sell new customers and new logos, as opposed to spending 3/4 of the time on renewals.
Yeah. Because I believe that and I love that. I mean, commercial debt is definitely, together with technical debt, I mean, if you put them all together, that's the friction element that comes. So that leads me to the question of, so if there's, and when there's now companies thinking of moving from one model, whatever is the model, to the next one, what is your advice? Where to start? I mean, what to get things in the right order? What is the roadmap of moving? Because it's not a walk in the park to move. We know that, but what is, based on your experience now, the first steps to take?
So we have a 4M model. We call it map, measure, monetize, manage. And map basically means that you need to sit down as an organization and figure out how you bring value to customers. Pragmatically, that often means that you get product and sales in the same room and say, okay, so we know what we're selling, but what is the customer actually trying to buy? Like, what is the outcome that we deliver to the market? Yeah. Like, and then how can we even sort of, how could we even start to measure that? Like, what are the things, the numbers, the data sources that we would need to have in order to sort of quantify that value? How can we structure packaging around that? What is the pricing model that would sort of very sort of naturally sort of come out of that insight? So that's the map part. And then the measure part, that's when you then actually build the infrastructure to then get that data, show to customers, predict it, control it, all these things. And then the monetize part is, now you're ready to actually create the pricing model, launch it into the market, like start the new pricing. And then the manage part, that's when you then say, okay, how do we deal with this sort of commercial debt issue as we go along? We can't not have it at all. So we need to be pragmatic, but we need to have it not run out of control. So that's the management part, where the CFO office and sales and development and product needs to sort of collaborate to have no commercial debt, but not too much. That's sort of the idea. So, but the first step is the mapping. That's the, let's say, the strategic or high level or almost like spiritual business question of like, why do we exist? Like, what is it that we actually do for customers? And then you get concrete from there.
And that needs to be I fully agree, that needs to be the starting point, always asking what is the value we are generating? Because monetization means that you're creating value, and then you are thinking, how do you make money out of it? That's my definition of a monetization, whatever is the value that you're having. Okay, Ulrik, that was a good, very, very clear model. I like that. So it was map, measure,
monetize, manage.
Monetize, manage. Yeah, 4 M's. Guys, keep that in mind. It's a good model. And I always end these discussions with a little bit of rapid fire questions. and now I need to take my glasses off because I need to read. So the idea is that I have a list of questions here, and you try to just very quickly, based on your spontaneous answer, give it for the audience. So, if you think about all the cases you've been part of, and you have seen the different pricing models, what is the moment, or what is the model that you have seen and made you think, who on earth approved that? I mean, the most stupid, most complex. You don't need to mention names, but what was the moment that, what the heck is this?
So I had a client once that had a pricing model with, I think, 16 different metrics. And they were sort of based on sort of different sort of structured tiers, where if you buy whatever the basic tiers, you get like 5 of this and 10 of that and 20 of that and whatever. So it was like all built in. And then if you need more, you can buy extras and everything. And 2 things was, they had no way of measuring any of this. Their sales team didn't understand it, like step 1, and nobody was using it. But they had, like, formally, they had been using it for 2 years, but it had not been executed at all in the sales organization, in the dev organization, in the product. Like, nobody was using it. It was very sort of technically savvy, and it had a lot of advanced math behind it, but it had no operational feasibility at all.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Bit of a theoretical, but not very practical in a way. Okay, then one word or few words to describe pure seed-based SaaS pricing model in 26.
Good for some.
Okay,
good for some. I think good for some. It's just know if you're that, and if you're not, don't do it, right? But good for some, I think so. So it's like it's taking a lot of flack, and in like 90% of cases, it's an obvious criticism, and you should move to something else. But there are going to be whatever 10% where that's the right model.
Yeah.
So just if you're that, ignore the criticism and keep going.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree. We shouldn't villainize too much. It's good for some. We didn't talk about outcome-based pricing, but I need to ask, if outcome-based pricing in your mind, what would be the emoji that would describe the outcome-based pricing in your minds? Smiley? Sad?
No, so I think it's the emoji that has like the big starry eyes, because it can be so it can be so extreme when it works, when it really truly works, that you have a completely different business than you had before you did it. If you truly nail outcome-based pricing, and it's actually not for every business model, but if you truly nail it, it can be very transformative.
Good, I like that, because I fully agree with that one as well. So what is the most overused pricing buzzword that you kind of hate that people are using that? Is there any word that comes?
Value-based pricing.
Value-based pricing. Okay. Yeah, you can ask.
So it's one of these things where, so first off, what is that? And it's one of these where you get into discussions where pricing professionals and like authors that write pricing books, they said, value-based pricing is actually this very like complex construct where you take alternatives and competitors and all these other things into consideration, and then you end up with like what willingness to pay, right? If you ask any salesperson or CRO out there, it's like, whatever the product is worth, that was what you charge. So there's this big disconnect between what all the operators think value-based pricing is, and then what all the, let's say, theoretical or professional pricing people think it is. And the problem is that they can't agree on the use of the word. So whenever like a professional says, well, you should do value-based pricing, the operator says, but I can't get customers to say yes to that. And then there's this big fail right? Which is so we often get people that say, well, we've heard we should do this, but we're not sure, and etc. So it's one of the most misunderstood terms, and it's used, I think, out of context in a lot of times. So that is.
Okay, one more. And now you need to finish the sentence without overthinking. The future of pricing belongs to companies that
Understand customer value.
I love that. That was fun. And obviously very, very relatable. Thanks, Ulrik. So I think we can first of all, there's one more question, like a bonus question, because I love your brand name, willingness to pay. Who coined that? Was it you?
So willingness to pay is a pricing term that dates back to, I think, the 50s, 60s. So I don't actually know when it sort of came into literature, but it was sort of a technical academic term. It was like, okay, so we're doing microeconomics and we're trying to we're doing theory of pricing. So willingness to pay was just one of those terms that was there. And then, so when I was like naming my consulting business, I thought I need a name for pricing consulting, and then that was there, and I thought that makes a ton of sense. Primarily also because I started pricing from the angle of design thinking and psychology, and so it fit pretty well with in extension of that.
And as a marketing kind of a person, I like that because it's distinctive, it is very clear, and it kind of captures the value or what is essential for the pricing. I mean, like you say, the customer first, think about the value you're delivering, and what is the willingness to pay. That's obviously. Thanks, Ulrik. It was a pleasure, like always, talking to you. I really appreciate your expertise and your advice, and I hope the audience got a lot of insights and ideas from this. And I want to end by saying that regardless how this transformation to the next monetization strategy or pricing looks like, it's like you said, it's an evolutionary normal thing, and you should treat it like that. There's it's not a scary thing. You have a lot of expertise like Ulrik in the world to help you. And we help you too.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you very much.